Behavioral Health Today, a podcast by Tried Behavioral Health covering trending topics in behavioral and mental health. This podcast is designed to share unique and relevant topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor, and today I'm joined by Dr. Lloyd Sederer. Lloyd is an adjunct professor at Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health, as well as the director of Columbia Psychiatric Media, and is the chief medical officer of Bongo Media. For 30 years, he provided patient care and ran clinical services, including serving as medical director and executive vice president of McLean Hospital, a Harvard teaching hospital. He then turned his work to public health, first as mental health commissioner for New York City, then as chief medical officer for the New York State Office of Mental Health, the largest state mental health agency in the United States. Lloyd also led the mental health disaster response to 9/11, Hurricane Sandy, and other tragic disasters. He's been awarded the Irma Bland Award for Excellence in Teaching Residents by the APA, which also named him Psychiatric Administrator of the Year. He's been a Rockefeller Scholar in Residence and the NAMI Exemplary Psychiatrist, among many other awards that he's received. Lloyd has published 13 books and many scientific and lay public articles and videos. In 2019, he founded Columbia Psychiatric Media, which produces topical expert videos, has a resident fellow podcast, and directs conferences on mental health, the addictions, and the social dimensions of health. Lloyd, this is quite a life you're living. I'm so happy to have you with us today, and welcome to Behavioral Health Today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. And as I listen to you, it sure sounds like I've had a lot of jobs. This guy may not be able to hold down a job.
Well, I think, as I mentioned, a life well lived and a lot of contribution and a lot of service, which is something in learning more and more about you, I want to talk about in our time today. But I want to start in introducing your book, Ink Stained for Life. Ink Stained for Life. This is a really cool book. And it's not a book that you had thought about kind of coming out or even writing some memoirs about. I understand that it all started with one story that you submitted to the New York Times way back in the day. And it was about you as a wee boy of 8 years old, growing up in New York City in the 1950s. So for you, what does this title of the book, Ink Stained for Life, actually capture for you, may I ask?
Oh, of course. It is the title story and first story in the book. And I wrote this 10 years ago. Uh-huh. And I had been taking a writing workshop the first time I ever took any coaching, and I haven't taken any since then about writing, but I took a workshop in New York with a quite legendary writer and reporter named Bill Zinsser, yes, who has passed. And it was a workshop, and 25 New Yorkers gathered once a week in the evening. And the expectation was that you would write a piece, 800, 900 words, read it to the class, and occasionally Zinsser would say something. And I did. And I wrote a 700-word piece called Ink Stained for Life. And it seemed to gather the group's attention. It was about my being an 8-year-old boy, shaken awake in the mornings on Saturday and Sunday at 6 a.m. to go with my father to work in the family business. And, I felt like I was being shanghaied. I would much rather be playing basketball, sleeping in, whatnot. Right. But that was my life, and the family business was my life. And one of my jobs was to assemble the newspapers, which were not bad on Saturday, the New York Times, Herald Tribune, Daily News, whatnot. But on Sunday, it was an ordeal because there was so many sections, right? So I had to bring the papers in from the doorways, put them on a makeshift counter, and assemble them. Lots of sections, especially for the Times, as you see today. Well, there's not that much paper. Yeah. But newspapers, especially back then, were dirty things because the ink would just come off on your fingers and on your clothes and then on your face. And I was ink stained.
I love it.
And that is a story, though, about how a work ethic, a very deep work ethic, was fashioned in me.
Yes.
So
I was going to ask you about that piece, because that ink stain suggests metaphorically that there's something that is indelibly taken away from that time.
yes.
And I was curious if it had set up for you any kind of life cornerstone or a motivation upon which you found yourself building your life. And I think you just said it right there. It's about this life of service.
Yes, and hard work.
Yeah, hard work.
And opportunity.
Yeah.
I thought that was an opportunity, but other things became opportunities, and recognizing them and working at them. I at least believe for many people, by no means all, because if you're poor or disadvantaged or color, you don't get the same opportunities. But I was a Jewish kid in the Bronx, lower middle class, and there was more of a meritocracy if you were white and if you were living in New York City. And that was the path that I had to follow. I didn't even think about it, but it was unnatural for me to not take opportunities to work hard.
That's really great. You know, for those that do pick up your book, they're going to find you do something in your writing that's fairly unique. For each of your stories, you've paired with it a companion essay on the meaning of the experience or memory, and then you provide a context around it at that time and place and in light of today's social issues. And in writing each story in this manner, it's as though you want us to take away a deeper understanding or meaning of something, as though you're hoping that we might walk away with maybe like a life lesson. Was that indeed your hope for us?
Well, thank you, Graham. That's a very kind compliment on your part. There's a curious story about the essays, because I wrote 14 stories. I had the one from the Times, and I didn't write a story again for 8 years. And then I was listening to Bill Zinsser on a few discs that he made before he died, with him narrating. I'd been on a long drive. I went up into our apartment and I just started writing stories again. And I wrote one every night. And after 13 or 14 more nights, I had
your book.
Right. And I thought,
That's
you know, as a writer, there's nothing that makes you happier than being done with whatever you're trying to do. And I thought I was done. And I then contacted my publisher, because I had a 2-book deal from my last book, and they had right of first refusal. And I told her, I have 14 stories. And she said, how many words? And I said, 19,000 to 20,000. And she said, well, come back to me with a book of 19,000 words after you've won a Pulitzer Prize. And the reason was the economics of the book industry.
Right.
Namely that in order for her to sell a book for $26 or $27, that would be a little book.
Yeah.
I had to be really famous, a Pulitzer winner or something. And I was not happy about this. I was a bit angry, disappointed. I dusted myself off after a few days, and I thought, how can I make the book better and longer?
There you go.
And that's how the essays.
Okay.
I thought, I know. I'm going to match each story with an essay, as you said, that talked about the message, the meaning, related it to the time and to today. And that didn't take 14 days. That took a year.
Got it. Yeah, what a nice way to kind of lengthen that out. But I think there's something very unique in what you've done that provides a whole nother dimension that kind of takes the stories and transcends them in some ways for there to be a deeper meaning and something that is a very nice takeaway. You know, when I think about stories and I think about mental health, being both practitioners, we get into people's stories. It's something that we do. And We get to learn about them and appreciate their lives and what they've achieved or overcome or accomplished and endured. Stories organize. Stories kind of create kind of a context or a template from which we live our lives. Our narrative is constantly going on, whether we're conscious of it or not. In your stories and in just your understanding from a mental health perspective, and maybe just your appreciation for narratives, I'm sure people have shared their stories with you too. How do you see narratives, one's stories being important in who we are individually, collectively? Give me your thoughts on that.
People receive stories in a very different way than they receive information.
That's good. Yeah.
That people don't remember information; they remember stories, and it just emblazes our minds. And it was about 10 or 12 years ago. I had written a fair amount of scientific articles and textbooks and whatnot, and I thought, I'm not reaching very many people. Maybe I have an article in even a good journal and 6 people read it. But I had a lot of experience by that time in real life and as a doctor. And I thought, I'm going to switch my writing from scientific writing to writing for the general public. And in order to do that, I had to write in everyday English, no jargon, none of that baloney, and I had to tell stories. And I started to do that, and I loved it. And that's what I've been doing since then.
I think that's a terrific way. You're talking about being able to connect, and people connect through the association of, hey, that sounds a little bit like me, or my story has some elements of what you're sharing. So there's almost a natural curiosity. As I listen to your story, I begin to think about my story and how it might be important or how it might relate in some ways. And I know the topic of your books have some really fun topics. You talk about families and family businesses, boys will be boys, intelligence, rich people, Jewish people, fathers and sons, gambling, service. There's some pretty cool topics in here. Tell me, do you have a favorite story in your book, or a couple favorite stories that stand out to you, and why would they be favorites to you?
There are 2. There's the first one, Staying for Life, because I was so young and I didn't even have a clue about anything except that something was changing in me. And the story, even though short, describes when I was released from that service because my father sold the business and I didn't have to go early in the morning. I didn't sleep in. I couldn't sleep in. I had what Jewish people call spilkies, or ants in the pants, because I needed to work. I needed to do things. And that was a transformative experience that I think is very common, that imperceptibly things happen to us over time and they etch into our nature, who we are, what our beliefs are, what our values. So I like that story because I didn't have a clue about what was happening except looking back. And the other is the last story, which has a title, Chickens, Hedges, and Public Service. And I wrote that a couple of years ago. So I had been in public service for 18 years or so. And I thought back when I was a kid, also 10 or 11, all the stories are set in my life from 8 years old to 17, living in New York. But in the summers, my family often went to stay with my mother's sister and on a chicken farm in upstate New York, Walden, New York. My uncle was a very unusual man. He had a auto repair and paint shop in Queens. And for some reason, he bought this farm, and there were about 300 or 400 chickens in long coops. And the chicken coops have to be cleaned. The chickens run on a wire, and their droppings below that.
So you're mucking the stalls here at some point.
That's right.
Right.
Exactly. And that was my job, and my Steve, who was his son, that was our job, and as was cutting the hedges, not with the electric hedge cutter.
With the old.
That, in some ways, that seemed uncannily like public service, not to be critical of public, but you really do have to clean the coops, particularly if you're trying to get something done. You have to take away what's not needed. You have to replace it, give the chickens a chance to stay alive. And the same thing with the hedges. And that was actually a first lecture I gave at a graduation, residency graduation, that nobody, I think, quite knew what I was talking about, but they did inside because I was talking about public service.
Yeah, I really like that. We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Behavioral and mental health professionals provide critical support to our communities in a time when our communities need it more than ever. But they need support too, to continue their education, to connect with colleagues, and to advance their career. And so we've launched Triad, the hub for behavioral and mental health professionals. At Triad, you'll find education, community, and career resources for both current and aspiring behavioral and mental health professionals, all curated specifically for you and all for free. Visit us at hellotriad.com/BHT to register for your free professional account. Again, that's hellotriad.com/BHT. Come join the community today.
You know, you convey life lessons that you have as takeaways being important to you. For me, they're stated somewhat simplistically, but they're so necessary and truly profound. And in their simplicity, they have great impact. You say, show up, work hard, and then most importantly, give back. Yeah. But I clearly sense that there's this deeper desire and conscious intent in the way you live your life, that you have a desire to touch lives. I would love to hear about this deeper part of yourself that you know lives life with that intention.
I don't think there's anything new about my saying that it's better to give than to receive.
Yeah.
And that I discovered that again and again. And the more I did that, the more I was glad I was doing it, the more proud I was, and the better I felt about myself, though that wasn't the reason.
Isn't that true? All those things come from giving things away, from helping out, giving our heart, giving our efforts. All those things come, don't they?
Yes, they do. And they sometimes don't come right away because of the time it takes for your efforts to be effective. You as a therapist know that. People don't walk out after 45 or 50 minutes and they're cured, but you've contributed. You've helped them find a better path to their future. And that may become evident after 6 months or a year, but it happens incrementally. And if we believe that, then we can stay the course. We can keep trying to contribute in whatever way is our way. Taking care of family, working in nursing, it doesn't matter as long as you have someone else principally in mind.
Yeah. In that same spirit, you write about kind of your heart. You say you want to convey to your readers the synergy between your development as a youth and I love the way you put this, the most amazing of responsibilities that you've had the privilege of trying to meet. And clearly, as we're talking, you have this heart of service, but it's experienced, it seems like, by you as a gift or a blessing that you've been given, that you're trying to effectively steward in your life.
Yeah.
Does that sense right?
Oh, absolutely. You're very, very keen. I think there are a couple things comment evokes. The first is that over time, I have just had the growing experience of gratitude.
Yes.
That I may have had to work. I did have to work for things, but I have so much gratitude in me now for other people that makes wanting to contribute doesn't feel like work. It just feels like an opportunity, as you said, to give back. And one of the exercises I often do, I think a lot of people, it's been studied, is to spend a few minutes each evening thinking about who you are grateful to today. And it may be the same person frequently. Some people suggest writing it down, but just taking a moment. It's almost like a prayer where you think, boy, I am so fortunate to have this person or
Yes.
that in my life. Gratitude is perhaps, I think, one of the most powerful, sustaining feelings that we have in our life.
In addition to the gratitude piece, and maybe speaking to kind of where we are at today, this idea of a solid work ethic, where nothing comes for free, and the idea that, work can actually be freeing up, and the experience of a part of ourselves that is so very rewarding, that only comes from being able to give and to sweat and to commit and to sacrifice, postpone gratification, all of those things. It's almost like we kind of need to reawaken this very fundamental work ethic. Do you have a thought on that?
Oh, yes. And that's the second feeling that Erickson talked about a long time ago, which is to have a life of purpose, a life of contribution. That, as an old guy, I can think, well, I've made a lot of mistakes. I did a lot of things I don't want to talk about, but I have a life of purpose. I have a life of contribution. So I don't have to feel so ashamed of myself like I did when I was 8 years old.
That's really good. I know part of what you've also written too is you said your life or your mission is to help folks gain an understanding of mental illness and addictions and their prevention and their treatment. As you work, you've done a lot of things to provide resources to folks. As we're kind of coming to the end of our time today, I'd love to hear about some of the resources that you might recommend that could direct us to your book, where the stories are there, and some life lessons and the essays that you attach to those, but also the many resources that you provide for folks to learn more about mental illness. Direct us to some of the sites that you'd recommend for us.
Well, the one that is non-ashamedly is my website, www.askdrloyd, askdrloyd.com. I write frequently, often once a week, and publish in various journals. And you can subscribe. It's free. And when something comes out, like this week it was a book review about ADHD by Ned Hallowell, a good friend who's one of the most recognized experts in the world. A couple weeks ago was a review of Queen's Gambit, or it may be something about COVID or about disaster. It's all there.
Very good.
If you want, you can pick and choose. The other is that there are some really good websites, more general public, that, for example, I'm a great fan of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And their website is really good because you can trust it.
Perfect. Really good. Well, as we come to a close, I want to see if I can maybe summarize something. And if you would allow me, I've taken a little bit of literary liberty here. I'm not very good with the writing piece as you are here, but I want to try and capture something. You said there is hope to achieve what we all want. So I added a couple of things here, but there is hope to achieve what we all want: a life with relationships, work that expresses our inner passion, and a life that leaves an indelible, ink-stained contribution. That all right?
Better than all right. I should hire you to be my agent. That's really beautifully said. Thank you.
Well, I think what you're allowing us to do today is to listen to your life, and it has relationships in it, which is either those you help, friendships, other colleagues, those in disasters, or those that get the benefit from your writings and your videos. And so easily it's heard that you are expressing something that is just so deeply ingrained in you. I trust in what you described, that when we come into people's lives, we do leave an indelible mark one way or the other, and we get to be intentional about it. It can be a healing mark. It can be a contribution that changes them forever. So I think that's a wonderful thing for us to be paying attention to and being intentional about.
I think that there's nothing quite as much of a privilege for other people to trust you.
Yes.
To feel that you have their interests at heart. That really is a privilege that many of us have, and we can have more of by being grateful and by finding ways to give more.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Lloyd, it's been a real privilege to be with you today. Thank you so much for being on our podcast and for sharing your book and just your life's work, and most importantly, with us, your heart. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me and for all you're doing, Graham, to convey so much to so many people.
I appreciate that. And always to our listeners, we so appreciate you being with us as well, and we will look forward to seeing you next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Tried Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.